I was gasping for air when my sister Madison stormed into my hospital room and ripped the oxygen tube from my nose. "Stop faking it, Jennifer. You just want pity," she snarled, while our parents Patricia and Robert stood there like statues saying absolutely nothing as I fought to breathe. My chest burned, my vision blurred, and panic set in as my oxygen levels plummeted. What none of them knew was that Dr. Harrison, my pulmonologist, stood directly behind them in the doorway, witnessing every cruel second of their betrayal. The lupus started 2 years ago when I was 26, though it took 8 months, and countless doctors before anyone believed something was actually wrong with me. I remember the morning everything changed. I woke up unable to move my hands properly, my joints screaming in pain, my face covered in the telltale butterfly rash that would become my constant companion. But lupus is invisible most days, which made it perfect ammunition for my family's cruelty. Madison had always been the golden child in our family. At 30, she was everything my parents wanted in a daughter. She climbed the corporate ladder at her marketing firm with ruthless efficiency, maintained a perfect size 6 figure, and never showed weakness. Meanwhile, I struggled through graduate school while battling an autoimmune disease that attacked my body like it was the enemy. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though. It was watching my family's love turn conditional. During Sunday dinners, Madison would make snide comments about my convenient naps and dramatic fatigue. When I had to leave family gatherings early because of joint pain, she would roll her eyes and whisper to our parents that I was attention-seeking. "Jennifer always has something wrong with her," Madison told our mother during one particularly brutal Thanksgiving. First it was headaches in college, then mysterious stomach problems, now this lupus nonsense. She just can't stand not being the center of attention. Our parents ate it up. Patricia, my mother, started treating my medical appointments like inconvenient drama. Robert, my father, began questioning whether I really needed to miss work for doctor visits. They both adopted Madison's narrative that I was weak, needy, and manipulative. The real turning point came 6 months ago when I found Dr. Harrison. Unlike the parade of dismissive physicians who had brushed off my symptoms, he listened. He ran comprehensive tests, studied my blood work with genuine concern, and finally gave me answers that made sense. Systemic lupus erythematosus had invaded my joints, my skin, my kidneys, and most recently, my lungs. "This is serious, Jennifer," Dr. Harrison had said during my diagnosis appointment, his kind eyes reflecting the gravity of my situation. Lupus doesn't just cause discomfort. It can damage vital organs permanently if we don't treat it aggressively. That validation meant everything to me, but my family remained skeptical. Even when I showed them educational materials about lupus, they treated it like an elaborate excuse. Madison actually laughed when I explained that lupus could affect my heart and lungs. "Of course it affects everything," she had mocked. "How convenient that your mystery disease explains away every possible symptom." The hospitalization that led to Madison's cruel attack happened because my lupus had progressed to lupus pneumonitis, a serious inflammation of the lungs. I couldn't breathe properly, my oxygen saturation levels kept dropping, and Dr. Harrison admitted me immediately for monitoring and treatment. The plastic tube feeding oxygen into my nose was literally keeping me alive. But my family saw it differently. They saw another attention-grabbing performance, another chance for me to play victim, while they had to rearrange their busy schedules to visit the hospital. Madison complained loudly to anyone who would listen that I was milking this for sympathy and probably enjoying all the fuss. What I hadn't told any of them was how much worse things had gotten. My latest test results, which Dr. Harrison planned to discuss with me that fateful afternoon, showed that the lupus had begun affecting my heart. The inflammation was spreading, and my prognosis had taken a serious turn for the worse. This wasn't just about joint pain and fatigue anymore. This was about survival. Dr. Harrison had been coming to deliver this devastating news when he witnessed Madison's attack. He stood frozen in the doorway, watching my sister literally pull life-sustaining medical equipment from my body, while my parents did nothing to stop her. In that moment, everything changed, though I wouldn't understand the full implications until much later. Dr. Harrison later told me that watching Madison yank out my oxygen tube was one of the most shocking things he had witnessed in 20 years of practicing medicine. As a physician, he had seen family members struggle with a loved one's illness, but he had never witnessed such deliberate cruelty directed at a patient fighting for her life. The moment Madison ripped the tube away, alarms started blaring throughout my room. My oxygen saturation levels plummeted from 92% to 78% in seconds. Nurses came running from every direction as I gasped and wheezed, my lungs burning with each desperate attempt to breathe. Dr. Harrison pushed past my stunned family members and immediately began directing the medical response. "Get her back on oxygen now," he commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "And I need her arterial blood gas levels checked immediately." While the nurses worked to stabilize me, Dr. Harrison turned to face my family with an expression I had never seen before. His usually warm demeanor had transformed into something cold and professional. Madison stood near my bed, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger, while my parents shuffled nervously by the window. "What exactly did you think you were accomplishing?" Dr. Harrison asked Madison, his voice deadly quiet. Madison lifted her chin defiantly. "She's been faking this whole thing for attention. Jennifer has always been dramatic, and now she's convinced everyone that she's some kind of invalid. Someone needed to call her bluff." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Harrison stared at Madison with an expression of pure disbelief, then looked at my parents who couldn't meet his gaze. The heart monitor showed my pulse racing as anxiety compounded my breathing difficulties. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Harrison said, addressing Madison with formal coldness, "your sister is fighting a serious autoimmune disease that could kill her. The oxygen she requires isn't optional or theatrical. Without it, her organs begin to shut down." But instead of showing remorse, Madison doubled down on her cruelty. She turned to the assembled nurses and spoke with the confidence of someone who believed herself to be saving everyone from my manipulation. "Don't let her fool you," Madison announced to the medical staff. "Jennifer has been playing sick since we were kids. She faints when she wants attention, claims mysterious pains when she wants sympathy, and now she's graduated to this elaborate lupus story. She's manipulative and attention-seeking, and she's wasting your time and hospital resources." The nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had been caring for me for 3 days and had witnessed my genuine struggle with breathing my elevated inflammatory markers and the visible evidence of my disease. Madison's accusations didn't match their professional observations, but family dynamics in hospitals could be complicated. Dr. Harrison, however, was not confused or uncertain. He had been treating lupus patients for decades, and he knew the difference between genuine illness and manufactured symptoms. More importantly, he had just witnessed a family member deliberately endanger a patient's life. "I need to speak with you privately," he told Madison, his voice leaving no room for argument. "All of you," he added, looking at my parents. As they filed out of my room, I heard Dr. Harrison giving detailed instructions to the nursing staff about monitoring my condition. But what I didn't know then was that he was also making careful notes in my medical chart about what he had witnessed. Hospital security cameras had captured the entire incident, and Dr. Harrison was documenting everything as potential evidence of patient abuse. The conversation in the hallway was muffled, but I could hear Dr. Harrison's voice rising occasionally as he explained the seriousness of my condition to my family. At one point, I heard Madison interrupt him with something that sounded like, "She's just trying to get out of taking responsibility for her life." When they returned to my room 20 minutes later, my family looked subdued but not apologetic. Madison had clearly been lectured about hospital policies and patient safety, but her expression remained skeptical and resentful. My parents seemed embarrassed by the scene, but not necessarily convinced that Madison was wrong about my character. What I didn't learn until later was that Dr. Harrison had made a phone call that would change everything. After documenting the oxygen tube incident in my medical records, he had called my grandfather Harold, a contact I had provided months earlier, as my emergency backup. The conversation was brief but shocking. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Harrison had said, "I'm calling about Jennifer. Has your family been keeping you informed about the severity of her condition?" There was a long pause before my grandfather responded. "What severity? My son tells me she has some joint problems, but that she's mostly fine. He says she's being a bit dramatic about normal aches and pains." Dr. Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that my family had been lying to my grandfather about my condition, downplaying a potentially fatal disease as minor discomfort. But what happened next would shock him even more. "Mr. Thompson, I think there are some things about Jennifer's condition that you need to know." My grandfather Harold had always been the one person in our family who truly saw me. At 78, he possessed the kind of quiet wisdom that came from building a successful manufacturing business from nothing and losing the love of his life to an autoimmune disease 30 years earlier. When Dr. Harrison called him that afternoon, Harold realized he had been systematically lied to about my health for months. The conversation with Dr. Harrison lasted over an hour. Harold learned that lupus wasn't joint problems, as my father had described, but a serious autoimmune condition that could attack any organ system. He discovered that I had been hospitalized multiple times, not for dramatic episodes, as my mother had claimed, but for legitimate medical emergencies. Most shocking of all, he found out that my recent hospitalization involved life-threatening lung inflammation. "Why would they lie to me?" Harold asked Dr. Harrison, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I can't speak to their motivations," Dr. Harrison replied carefully, "but I can tell you that Jennifer is fighting for her life, and she's doing it without family support." After hanging up with Dr. Harrison, Harold sat in his study for a long time thinking about my grandmother Eleanor and her battle with rheumatoid arthritis. He remembered the way the disease had gradually stolen her mobility, her energy, and eventually her life. He also remembered how the family had rallied around her with love and support, never questioning the reality of her suffering. The contrast with how my family was treating me was stark and heartbreaking. Harold had been successful in business because he was methodical and thorough. He applied those same skills to understanding my situation. Over the next several days, he researched lupus, extensively consulted with medical professionals he knew through his business connections, and began making discreet inquiries about my family's behavior. What he discovered horrified him. Through careful questioning, Harold learned that Robert and Patricia had been actively discouraging family members from visiting me in the hospital, claiming I was fine and just seeking attention. Madison had been telling extended family that I was lazy and making excuses to avoid work. They had created an elaborate narrative painting me as manipulative and dishonest, while presenting themselves as long-suffering parents dealing with a difficult child. Harold decided to test this narrative by calling my father directly. "Robert, I'm concerned about Jennifer. Dr. Harrison seems to think her condition is quite serious." Robert's response was immediate and dismissive. "Dad, you know how Jennifer is. She's always been dramatic. This lupus thing is just her latest excuse for not taking responsibility for her life. The doctors have to be careful and supportive because that's their job, but we know her better than they do. So you don't think I should worry?" "Honestly, Dad, the best thing we can do for Jennifer is not enable her behavior. If we keep rushing to her bedside every time she claims something is wrong, we're just reinforcing her patterns. Madison thinks some tough love might actually help Jennifer grow up and stop depending on sympathy to get through life." Harold felt sick listening to his son's words. He pressed further. "What about her breathing problems? Dr. Harrison mentioned she needed oxygen support." Robert laughed. Actually laughed before responding. "She was probably hyperventilating from anxiety about being called out on her behavior. Madison finally had the courage to tell Jennifer to stop performing, and Jennifer couldn't handle being confronted with reality." The call ended with Harold promising to not worry unnecessarily, but inside his heart was breaking. His son had become someone he didn't recognize, and his granddaughter was suffering because of it. Harold's investigation didn't stop there. He hired a private investigator to discreetly document my family's behavior and statements about my illness. The recordings were devastating. In one particularly cruel conversation captured at a restaurant, Madison told Patricia, "I almost feel bad for the doctors who have to pretend to take her seriously. Jennifer has probably convinced herself she's actually sick by now." Patricia had responded, "The scary part is how good she's gotten at it. If I didn't know her history of drama, I might believe it myself." But the recording that broke Harold's heart was one where Robert explained to his business partner why he wasn't visiting me in the hospital. "My daughter has this need to be the center of attention," Robert had said. "If I rush to her bedside every time she claims to be dying, I'm just feeding into it. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction." Harold listened to hours of these recordings, each one revealing how thoroughly my family had convinced themselves that my suffering was fake. But what struck him most was how they talked about my condition when they thought no one who cared about me was listening. They weren't just dismissive, they were contemptuous. The final piece of Harold's investigation involved visiting me in the hospital himself. He told my parents he had business in the city and wanted to stop by briefly downplaying his concern so they wouldn't try to discourage the visit. When Harold walked into my hospital room and saw me connected to oxygen IVs and monitoring equipment, he knew immediately that everything my family had told him was a lie. I was thin, pale, and clearly struggling. The butterfly rash across my cheeks that marked active lupus was visible and unmistakable. This wasn't performance or manipulation. This was genuine illness. We talked for 2 hours. I told him about my symptoms, my treatments, my fears about the progression of the disease. Harold listened with the kind of attention my parents had never given me, asking thoughtful questions and expressing genuine concern. When I mentioned that the lupus had begun affecting my heart, Harold had to excuse himself to the hallway to compose himself. "Why didn't anyone tell me how serious this was?" he asked when he returned. "I thought they had," I said softly. "I assumed they were keeping you updated." Harold realized then that my family hadn't just been lying to him about my condition. They had been lying to me about sharing information with him. I had been isolated from the one family member who would have supported me through this fight. That night, Harold called his estate attorney and scheduled an emergency meeting. If his family could be so cruel to a seriously ill young woman, they had revealed something fundamental about their character. And if they were lying to him about something this important, what else were they hiding? The recordings of their cruel conversations would serve as evidence, but Harold had something else in mind. He wanted to give them one final chance to show basic human decency toward me. If they failed that test, he would know exactly what kind of people they really were. Catherine Walsh had been Harold's estate attorney for 15 years, but she had never seen him as angry as he was during their emergency meeting 3 days after he visited me in the hospital. Harold brought a folder thick with medical documents, private investigator reports, and audio recordings that painted a devastating picture of my family's cruelty. "Catherine, I need to completely restructure my will," Harold said, sliding the folder across her mahogany desk. "And I need to do it in a way that teaches my family a lesson they'll never forget." Catherine spent 2 hours reviewing Harold's evidence. The medical records Dr. Harrison had shared with Harold's permission showed the serious progression of my lupus, including the new cardiac involvement that made my prognosis significantly more concerning. The private investigators' recordings revealed a family that not only dismissed my suffering, but actively mocked it behind closed doors. "This is unconscionable," Catherine said after listening to the restaurant recording where Madison and Patricia laughed about doctors having to pretend to take me seriously. "These people are talking about a family member fighting a potentially fatal disease." "That's exactly why I need your help," Harold replied. "I want to rewrite my will to leave everything to Jennifer, but I want to do it in a way that exposes their true character to everyone present." Harold's estate was valued at approximately $2,800,000 accumulated through decades of successful business ownership and careful investments. Originally, he had planned to divide it among Robert, Patricia, and both granddaughters, with additional provisions for my medical expenses. But learning about my family's behavior had changed everything. "I want you to arrange a formal will reading," Harold continued. "Invite the whole family, but don't tell them about the changes. Let them assume they're inheriting substantial amounts." Catherine understood Harold's strategy immediately. "You want to give them enough rope to hang themselves." "Precisely, but there's one more element I want to include." Harold explained that he wanted Dr. Harrison present at the will reading as a medical witness. He had spoken with Dr. Harrison about my family's behavior, and the doctor had agreed to attend both to support me and to provide professional testimony about my condition if needed. "I have one more request," Harold said. "Before we finalize anything, I want to give them one final test. I'm going to ask each of them to visit Jennifer in the hospital. If even one of them shows genuine concern or support, I might reconsider." Over the next week, Catherine worked with Harold to restructure his entire estate. The new will left his entire fortune to me with specific language explaining that the money was designated for medical expenses, long-term care, and ensuring that I would never have to choose between treatment and financial security. The will also included a detailed explanation of Harold's reasoning, mentioning the recorded conversations, the medical evidence, and the oxygen tube incident. But the most powerful element was a letter Harold wrote to be read aloud, explaining how my family's cruelty had reminded him of the importance of supporting vulnerable family members rather than attacking them, while Catherine drafted the legal documents Harold conducted his final test. He called Robert, Patricia, and Madison separately, explaining that Jennifer was feeling isolated in the hospital and asking each of them to visit her as a personal favor to him. Robert's response was immediate and dismissive. "Dad, the last thing Jennifer needs is more attention and sympathy. She needs to learn that being sick doesn't excuse her from normal responsibilities. Visiting her just enables her victim mentality." Patricia was even worse. "Harold, I understand you're worried, but Madison is right about Jennifer needing tough love. If we keep rushing to comfort her every time she claims something is wrong, we're not helping her grow as a person." But Madison's response was the most revealing. "Grandpa Jennifer is probably loving all this drama and attention. She's finally gotten everyone focused on her again. Visiting her would just reinforce her behavior. She's not as sick as she's pretending to be." Harold recorded all 3 conversations. When Catherine heard them, she shook her head in disbelief. "How can they be so cruel to their own family member?" she asked. "Because they've convinced themselves that cruelty is kindness," Harold replied sadly. "They think they're helping Jennifer by refusing to support her, which makes their behavior even more dangerous." The final element of Harold's plan involved ensuring that Madison would reveal her true character at the will reading itself. Through his conversations with Dr. Harrison, Harold had learned that Madison was due for routine medical screening through her company's health insurance plan. The timing would be perfect. Harold also asked Catherine to invite a court stenographer to the will reading ostensibly to ensure accuracy, but actually to create an official record of everything that would be said. If Madison's behavior was as cruel as Harold suspected, he wanted documentation that could be used to protect me from future harassment. 2 weeks before the scheduled will reading, Harold visited me in the hospital one final time. I was feeling slightly better, though still requiring oxygen support and careful monitoring. Harold brought me flowers and spent an hour just talking about my grandmother Eleanor and how proud she would have been of my strength in fighting this disease. "Jennifer," Harold said as he prepared to leave, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're not alone in this fight." "I know, Grandpa. Having you believe me means everything. I need you to trust me about something. Next week I'm having a family meeting about estate planning. I know you're not feeling well, but I really need you to be there. Can you do that for me?" I promised to attend, though I had no idea what Harold was planning. In my mind, the meeting was probably just boring legal paperwork. I couldn't have imagined that Harold was orchestrating the most devastating revelation my family would ever experience. The night before the will reading, Harold called Dr. Harrison to confirm his attendance and to share one final piece of information that would make the next day even more shocking. "Doctor, I have some news about Madison that I think you should know before tomorrow's meeting." Catherine Walsh's law office occupied the 32nd floor of downtown's most prestigious building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and conference rooms designed to handle the most important family business. The mahogany table in Conference Room A had witnessed decades of estate settlements, business negotiations, and family revelations, but nothing quite like what Harold had planned. I arrived first, wheeled in by a hospital transport service since I was still too weak to drive. The portable oxygen tank beside my wheelchair felt heavy and cumbersome, but Dr. Harrison had insisted I needed continued support for my compromised lung function. Catherine's assistant helped me get settled at the table, adjusting my chair so I could reach the documents and water glass they provided. Madison swept in 10 minutes later, dressed in her power suit and radiating the confidence of someone expecting good news. She barely acknowledged me beyond a dismissive glance at my medical equipment. "Still milking the invalid act, I see," she murmured under her breath, loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Patricia and Robert followed shortly after, both looking uncomfortable, but trying to hide their anticipation behind expressions of familial concern. Patricia gave me a stiff hug that felt obligatory, while Robert patted my shoulder awkwardly and asked how I was holding up in a tone that suggested he hoped for a brief answer. Harold entered with Dr. Harrison at exactly 2 o'clock, both men looking serious and formal. Madison's eyes narrowed slightly at seeing the doctor, but she assumed his presence was related to my ongoing medical needs rather than anything that might affect her. "Thank you all for coming." Catherine began settling behind a stack of legal documents. Harold has asked me to handle the formal reading of his last will and testament, along with some estate planning discussions. Madison and my parents exchanged satisfied glances. In their minds, this meeting was about dividing Harold's considerable wealth, and they had already discussed among themselves how the money should be allocated. Madison expected to inherit the largest portion given her status as the successful granddaughter, while my parents anticipated significant bequests for their retirement planning. "Before we begin," Catherine continued, "Harold would like to say a few words." Harold stood slowly, his age showing more than usual as he surveyed his family gathered around the table. When his eyes met mine, I saw warmth and sadness that I didn't fully understand. "I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about family loyalty and what we owe to people we love," Harold began. "The past few months have been educational for me in ways I never expected." Madison shifted impatiently in her chair, clearly eager to move past emotional speeches and get to the financial details. Robert checked his watch discreetly, while Patricia arranged her notepad to record whatever numbers would be mentioned. "I've learned things about each of you that have surprised me," Harold continued. "I've discovered how you treat vulnerable family members when you think no one is watching. I've seen how you respond to someone else's suffering. And I've realized that character reveals itself most clearly during crisis." The atmosphere in the room began to shift as Harold's words took on an edge that hadn't been there initially. Madison's confident expression flickered with uncertainty, while my parents looked puzzled by the serious tone. "Catherine, please proceed with the reading," Harold said, taking his seat. Catherine opened the first document and began reading the standard legal language that opens all wills. My family listened politely as she covered Harold's mental capacity, the revocation of previous wills, and various procedural elements. But then came the section they were waiting for. "To my son Robert Thompson and daughter-in-law Patricia Thompson, I leave the sum of $1,000 each to be used for professional counseling to address their failure as parents and human beings." The room went dead silent. Robert's face flushed red while Patricia's mouth opened in shock. Madison leaned forward, suddenly alert and concerned about where this was heading. "To my granddaughter Madison Patterson, I leave the sum of $1,000 to be used for character development and empathy training, which she desperately needs." Madison shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. "What is this, Grandpa? What's going on?" Catherine continued reading without acknowledgement of the interruption. "The remainder of my estate valued at approximately $2,796,000 I leave entirely to my granddaughter Jennifer Thompson to be used for medical expenses, long-term care, and ensuring her financial security while battling a serious autoimmune disease." The explosion was immediate and volcanic. Madison began shouting about manipulation and fraud, while Robert demanded to know what lies I had told Harold. Patricia accused me of playing victim to steal their inheritance, her voice shrill with disbelief and rage. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Madison screamed, pointing at me with shaking hands. "She's manipulated a sick old man with her fake illness story, and now she's stealing money that belongs to the family." Harold raised his hand for silence, but Madison was beyond reason. She turned to Catherine and began threatening lawsuits demanding proof that Harold was mentally competent when he wrote the will. She accused Dr. Harrison of being part of some elaborate conspiracy, claiming that medical professionals had been bought off to support my performance. "Madison, sit down," Harold said quietly, but his granddaughter was in full meltdown mode. "No, I will not sit down while this manipulative witch steals our family's money." Madison turned to face me directly, her face contorted with rage. "You've finally done it, haven't you? You've convinced everyone that your pathetic need for attention is actually a real disease. Well, I'm not buying it, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you really are. Robert and Patricia joined in, both talking over each other as they hurled accusations about my character, my motives, and my supposed manipulation of Harold's emotions. The conference room filled with shouting voices, legal threats, and family bonds disintegrating in real time. But Harold was watching and listening carefully, letting them reveal exactly who they were when they thought inheritance money was at stake. Catherine was taking notes of everything being said, while the court stenographer documented each cruel word for the official record. "Are you finished?" Harold asked when the shouting finally died down. Madison was breathing heavily, her professional composure completely destroyed. "Finished? I haven't even started. I'm going to contest this will, and I'm going to expose Jennifer's lies to every doctor and every court in this state. She won't get away with this fraud." Harold nodded slowly, as if Madison had just confirmed everything he suspected about her character. Then he looked at Dr. Harrison and gave him a slight nod. "Before you begin legal proceedings," Harold said calmly, "Dr. Harrison has something he'd like to share about recent medical developments." Madison turned to face Dr. Harrison with contempt, clearly expecting him to support her narrative about my supposed fakery. "Go ahead, doctor. Tell everyone how Jennifer has convinced you to participate in her elaborate victim performance." Dr. Harrison stood and walked around the table until he was standing directly behind Madison's chair. The room fell silent as everyone waited for him to speak. He placed one hand gently on Madison's shoulder, a gesture that seemed supportive but felt ominous in the tense atmosphere. "Madison," Dr. Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute medical authority, "I do have something important to tell you." Dr. Harrison's hand remained on Madison's shoulder as he looked directly into her eyes and spoke 6 words that shattered her world completely. "She's lived longer than you will." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the air conditioning humming and Catherine's pen clicking against her notepad. Madison's face went through a series of transformations, from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as Dr. Harrison's words began to sink in. "What did you say?" Madison whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your recent blood work from your company's health screening showed some concerning markers." Dr. Harrison continued his medical training, allowing him to deliver devastating news with professional compassion. "The lab flagged several values that indicate possible pancreatic abnormalities. You should have received a call requesting follow-up testing." Madison's hands began shaking as she reached into her purse for her phone. "I've been ignoring calls from my doctor's office," she admitted, her voice hollow. "I thought they were just trying to schedule routine follow-ups." "Madison, based on your blood chemistry panel, specifically your CA-19-9 tumor marker levels and elevated bilirubin, you need immediate diagnostic imaging. These values, combined with some other factors, suggest the possibility of pancreatic cancer." The color drained from Madison's face as she sank back into her chair. Robert and Patricia stared at their eldest daughter in shock, the inheritance dispute suddenly forgotten in the face of this medical crisis. "But I feel fine," Madison protested weakly. "I don't have any symptoms. I'm never sick." Pancreatic cancer is often called the silent killer because symptoms don't appear until the disease is advanced, Dr. Harrison explained gently. "However, if we've caught it early through your routine, screening treatment options are much more favorable." Harold watched his granddaughter's world collapse and felt no satisfaction, only sadness for the family dysfunction that had led to this moment. "Madison, the irony isn't lost on me that you're now facing the same thing you've been denying Jennifer experiences every day." Madison looked across the table at me with eyes filled with terror, and for the first time something that might have been understanding. Jennifer, I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know what it felt like to be scared about your health. But Dr. Harrison wasn't finished with his revelations. There's something else you all need to understand about Jennifer's condition. The lupus has progressed to affect her cardiac system. We've been monitoring inflammation around her heart that could lead to serious complications. Robert leaned forward, his face pale. Are you saying Jennifer could die from this? Lupus is a serious autoimmune disease that can be fatal if not properly managed, Dr. Harrison replied. Jennifer has been fighting for her life while dealing with your accusations that she was faking illness for attention. The room fell silent again as the full weight of the family's cruelty became clear. Madison had spent months attacking a sister who was genuinely fighting a potentially fatal disease while developing her own life-threatening condition. The morning you pulled Jennifer's oxygen tube from her nose, Dr. Harrison continued looking directly at Madison. You weren't calling out fake behavior. You were endangering the life of someone whose lungs were already compromised by disease. If I hadn't been there to intervene immediately, you could have killed her. Madison began crying, not the angry tears of someone whose plans had been disrupted, but the broken sobs of someone finally understanding the magnitude of her actions. I thought she was pretending, she whispered through her tears. I thought she was making it all up for sympathy. Why would you think that? Dr. Harrison asked. What evidence did you have that lupus wasn't real? Madison looked around the room helplessly, unable to articulate the jealousy, resentment, and fear that had driven her to such cruelty. I just wanted her to be stronger, she finally said. I wanted her to stop being weak and needy. Harold spoke up from across the table, his voice heavy with disappointment. Madison, your sister wasn't being weak. She was being brave, fighting a chronic illness while maintaining her studies, her work, and trying to preserve family relationships takes tremendous strength. Patricia had been silent throughout Dr. Harrison's revelations, but now she spoke up with a trembling voice. We failed you, Jennifer. We failed you completely. Robert nodded in agreement, his usual confidence replaced by shame. We let Madison convince us that you were being dramatic, and we never bothered to research your condition or talk to your doctors ourselves. Catherine had been documenting everything for the legal record, but she also recognized that this family was experiencing a profound reckoning that went far beyond estate planning. Perhaps we should take a break, she suggested, so Madison can make the necessary medical appointments. But Madison shook her head. No, I need to understand everything first. Jennifer, how long have you known about the heart involvement? Dr. Harrison was coming to tell me the day you pulled out my oxygen tube, I replied softly. He had just received the test results. Madison covered her face with her hands as she realized she had attacked me on the very day I was learning my condition had worsened. I could have killed you that day, couldn't I? Dr. Harrison nodded gravely. Lupus patients with cardiac involvement are particularly vulnerable to oxygen deprivation. Yes, your actions could have had fatal consequences. The confession that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard from Madison. Sitting in that lawyer's conference room facing her own mortality, my sister finally revealed the fear and insecurity that had driven years of cruelty. I was always afraid. Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid that if you were really sick, it meant I could get sick too. Afraid that if I showed you sympathy, it would make me vulnerable. I thought if I could prove you were faking, then illness couldn't touch our family. Harold reached across the table and took Madison's hand. Sweetheart, denying illness doesn't prevent it. Supporting someone who's suffering doesn't make you weak. But I was also jealous. Madison continued, the words tumbling out like a confession. Jennifer was always smarter than me, kinder than me, more creative. When she got sick, part of me was relieved that she finally had something that made her less perfect. It's horrible, but it's true. The honesty was devastating and necessary. For the first time in our adult lives, Madison was telling the truth about her feelings instead of hiding behind cruelty and manipulation. Dr. Harrison checked his watch and stood up. "Madison, I'm going to call your primary care physician right now and arrange for emergency testing. We can't wait any longer to confirm what we're dealing with." As Dr. Harrison stepped out to make phone calls, Madison turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. "Jennifer, can you ever forgive me? Not just for today, but for everything." Looking at my sister in that moment, seeing her fear and genuine remorse, I realized that Harold's plan had worked perfectly. The will reading hadn't just redistributed money. It had forced everyone to confront who they really were and what they valued. But the story wasn't over. Dr. Harrison's 6 words had created a new crisis that would test whether my family could truly change or whether their concern was temporary and self-serving. The next 6 months transformed our family in ways I never could have imagined. Madison's emergency testing confirmed early-stage pancreatic cancer caught just before it would have spread beyond treatment. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that routine medical screening had potentially saved her life while she had spent months denying the legitimacy of medical care for my condition. Madison underwent aggressive treatment at the same medical center where I received my lupus care. Dr. Harrison coordinated our appointments so we could support each other through the grueling schedule of treatments, tests, and recovery periods. For the first time in our adult lives, we were truly sisters facing something together. The chemotherapy hit Madison hard, stripping away the physical perfection she had always used as armor against the world. I watched her struggle with nausea, fatigue, and the loss of her beautiful hair, understanding for the first time what it felt like to have a body that betrayed her expectations. But I also watched her discover reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. Jennifer Madison said one afternoon as we sat in the cancer center's infusion room, both of us connected to IV poles, "I finally understand why you were so tired all the time. I used to think you were lazy, but fighting your body every day is exhausting." Our parents underwent their own transformation during this period. Robert and Patricia started attending family therapy sessions initially to process their guilt about how they had treated me, but eventually to address deeper issues about favoritism, expectations, and emotional support. Patricia admitted she had been intimidated by my intelligence and had unconsciously resented having a daughter who challenged her in ways Madison never did. I was more comfortable with Madison's success because it was the kind I understood, Patricia explained during one particularly difficult session. "Your academic achievements and creative thinking made me feel inadequate as a mother." Robert's revelation was even more painful. "I saw your illness as weakness because I was terrified of my own mortality. If I admitted you were really sick, I'd have to face the fact that health isn't something you earn through hard work and determination." Harold's inheritance became a catalyst for positive change rather than just financial support. With the security of knowing my medical expenses were covered, I was able to pursue experimental lupus treatments that significantly improved my quality of life. But more importantly, the money allowed me to start a nonprofit organization supporting other people with invisible illnesses who faced family skepticism and social isolation. Madison, despite her own cancer treatment, became the organization's most passionate volunteer. She spoke at support groups about her experience dismissing a family member's illness and the devastating consequences of that denial. Her corporate marketing background proved invaluable in developing awareness campaigns that reached families dealing with similar dynamics. "I can't undo the damage I caused," Madison told a room full of lupus patients and their families during one of our early educational events. But I can use my experience to help other people recognize the signs of illness denial before it destroys their relationships. Dr. Harrison became more than just our physician during this period. He became a trusted family friend who helped navigate the complex medical and emotional challenges we faced. He often spoke about how witnessing our family's transformation had renewed his faith in people's capacity for growth and redemption. Most families facing serious illness either come together or fall apart. Dr. Harrison told me during a follow-up appointment 6 months after the will reading, "Your family chose to come together even when it required admitting terrible mistakes. The most profound change occurred in my relationship with Madison. Cancer treatment stripped away her defenses and pretenses, revealing the scared, insecure person who had hidden behind cruelty for so many years. As she struggled with the side effects of chemotherapy, I was able to offer the kind of support and understanding that only someone with chronic illness could provide. I never realized how much courage it takes just to get through a normal day when your body is fighting you," Madison admitted one evening as I helped her with anti-nausea medications after a particularly difficult chemo session. "The hardest part isn't the physical symptoms," I replied, adjusting her pillows to help her get comfortable. "It's feeling like you have to prove you're sick enough to deserve compassion." Madison's treatment was successful. After 6 months of chemotherapy and surgery, her oncologist declared her cancer-free, with an excellent prognosis for long-term survival. The relief we all felt was overwhelming, but it was different from the simple happiness of good news. It was the deeper satisfaction of knowing we had faced crisis as a real family for the first time. My lupus, while still serious, stabilized with the new treatments Harold's inheritance had made possible. The heart involvement that had terrified Dr. Harrison responded well to aggressive immunosuppressive therapy, and my quality of life improved dramatically. More importantly, I no longer had to fight my disease while also battling family members who questioned its legitimacy. The organization Madison and I founded together grew beyond anything we had initially imagined. We developed educational materials for families, training programs for medical professionals, and support networks for people whose illnesses were dismissed or minimized by their loved ones. Madison's business expertise and my academic background created a powerful partnership that helped thousands of people navigate similar challenges. Harold lived to see all of these changes passing away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 80. His funeral was attended not just by our transformed family, but by dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the organization that grew out of his final lesson in accountability and love. At the funeral, Catherine Walsh read a final letter Harold had written to be opened only after his death. In it, he explained that the will reading had been designed not to punish his family, but to create an opportunity for them to choose love over selfishness. He had hoped they would rise to the occasion, and he expressed his joy that they had exceeded his expectations. "The greatest inheritance I can leave," Harold's letter concluded, "isn't money, but the knowledge that even the most broken relationships can be healed when people choose courage over comfort and truth over convenience." Today, 3 years after that devastating will reading, our family looks nothing like it did before. Madison and I are genuinely close bonded by shared medical challenges, but also by mutual respect and understanding. Our parents have learned to offer support without trying to fix everything, and they've developed the emotional intelligence to recognize that love sometimes means simply bearing witness to someone else's struggle. Madison's cancer remains in remission, and she approaches her health with the kind of careful attention she once mocked in me. My lupus is well controlled, though I'll always live with the uncertainty that comes with chronic illness. But I no longer face that uncertainty alone. The lesson we learned in Catherine Walsh's conference room that day wasn't just about family loyalty or the consequences of cruelty. It was about the transformative power of truth, even when that truth is painful. Harold's plan forced us all to confront who we really were when we thought no one was watching, and it gave us the opportunity to choose who we wanted to become. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't surviving what others do to you, but choosing grace when you have every right to walk away. True family isn't about blood relations or shared genetics. It's about who stands with you when you're fighting for your life, who believes you when your struggles aren't visible, and who chooses love even when it's difficult. Have you ever had someone in your life refuse to believe in your struggles or dismiss your pain? How did you find the strength to keep fighting when the people who should have supported you couldn't see your truth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because sharing our experiences helps all of us feel less alone in our hardest moments. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about families healing and the power of choosing compassion over judgment. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their struggles are valid and their strength is real. And remember, whatever you're facing today, you deserve support, understanding, and love. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always find the courage to believe in your own truth and the wisdom to extend grace to others, even when they haven't earned it. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.